everyone, and welcome to my highlights and thoughts video for Hollow Knight. Now, it has been a couple of days since I finished my playthrough, and I have since then tried my best to put all of my thoughts about the game into some kind of order. Because Hollow Knight is a fantastic game that I just pretty much fell in love with, and I would love to be able to share all of my thoughts about the game with you guys in a way that makes sense. Hopefully I'll be able to do just that, so let's just dive straight into it. Now, when I first started the game, I have to admit I did so with a certain level of skepticism. Not because I had any doubts about the quality of the game, I didn't. My friend had described the game to me as essentially being Bloodborne in 2D, so needless to say, that immediately caught my attention and I fully expected the game to, quality-wise, be on the same level as Bloodborne. No, my skepticism was born from my doubt in my ability to actually play the game. Because up until then, I'd only played Soulsborne games, which are very different to Metroidvania games, platform games, which is what Hollow Knight is. Not only that, but Hollow Knight is also classified as a Souls-like, which is kind of like adding an extra level of difficulty to the game. Which made my doubt grow even more, because the last time that I played a platform game had been way back when I was 10 or 11 years old, and although that was a long time ago, I very vividly remember that whenever I tried to play a platform game back then, I would struggle with it a lot. So yeah, I wasn't particularly confident that I would be able to get all that far in Hollow Knight if I did decide to give the game a go. However, my friend's description had made me very curious, and eventually that curiosity won out, and I ended up giving the game a try. Now, before I actually started my playthrough, I went into the controller settings because I just wanted to make sure that the controls were as intuitive as possible for me. AKA that the control setup was as similar as possible to the one that I was used to from playing the Soulsborne games. And when I did that, I saw that I would have access to something called the nail arts, something called a dream nail, and spells, which is like immediately made me curious, yes, but it also made me think that maybe this really wasn't a game for me. I felt that there was maybe an expectation that the player would gain a grasp on all of these abilities relatively early on, and that they would then be expected to use these abilities for as much of the playthrough as possible. So when I finally started my playthrough, I figured, okay, not only do I have to figure out how to move around in a platform game, which I hadn't played in many years, but I would also have to figure out how to use these abilities, actively use all of these abilities whilst moving around. A lot of pressure. And then I discovered, oh, actually I can only move backwards, forwards, do one single jump, and perform a basic attack. That's it. None of the other abilities were available to me, which instantly removed all of that pressure and I feel allowed me to get used to moving around Hallownest at my own pace. So that by the time that I got around to the third or maybe fourth episode, I felt pretty okay moving around in the game. Not necessarily comfortable yet, but okay. So that's something that immediately a great positive in the game for me. And it only became even better when I discovered that in order to acquire these abilities, I would have to explore Hallownest and find them. And sometimes finding them meant fighting bosses in order to get to these abilities. Like when I had to fight Hornet in Green Path in order to acquire the Mothwing Cloak, which gave me the ability to dash. Or when I had to get past the Broken Vessel in, was it the Ancient Basin, I think? And then was able to acquire the Monarch Wings, which gave me an extra jump in the air, so essentially the ability to double jump. And I really liked that the developers had implemented the abilities in the game, or the acquisition of the abilities in the game, as an extra incentive for exploration. I really liked that. What I liked even more about this, actually, is that it made perfect sense to me for all of these abilities to be where they were and to be acquired the way that they were. So it made, for example, a lot of sense to me to acquire the Vengeful Spirit after talking to the shaman at the Ancestral Mount in the Forbidden Crossroads, or to acquire the Desolate Dive ability after fighting the Soul Master in the Soul Sanctum, with the Soul Master himself using that same ability in the boss fight, or acquiring the Mantis Claws in the Mantis Village, which allowed me to climb up walls. So the fact that the abilities, or I don't know, the locations of these various movement and skill, and I don't know, like miscellaneous skills, I don't know what you want to call them, like just the locations of these abilities made perfect sense, and that in turn made the skill progression feel very natural and just very smooth, which I really, really enjoyed because it added to the immersion in the game for me. Now, of course, not all abilities were acquired. I did start out with a small set of abilities, and amongst this set of abilities was the Pogo ability, which essentially involves the player character jumping into the air once, and then striking downwards with their nail, and then depending on what kind of surface the strike would hit, the player character would bounce higher and essentially just gain some extra altitude. A very neat and nice ability, and as I said, technically speaking, one that I actually had access to right from the very beginning, but I didn't find out about its existence until I needed it, until I required it. And that was when I came to the Fungal Wastes area. Oh! There! Right, so it's a downward slash. I see. Oh god, okay. It's a very interesting area, and I dare say even a very fun area with the bouncing mushrooms there, but it's an area that can only really be traversed by using the Pogo skill. And getting the hang of that skill was very much a struggle for me. Like, that's the moment when I once again started doubting my ability to actually play the game. It's this very much platforming aspect of it that was giving me so much trouble, and I really struggled to get through the Fungal Waste. Once I got through that area, I pretty much said to myself, I'm not going to use the Pogo skills anywhere else unless I absolutely have to. And much to my joy, I didn't actually have to use the Pogo skills in any of the other areas until after I had reached the first ending of the game. Because in order to unlock the second and third endings, I had to acquire something called the Void Heart. And in order to acquire the Void Heart, I had to go through the one area where the player is forced to use the Pogo skill, the White Palace. Now, as an area, I really actually found it interesting, particularly lore-wise, but as a player, I didn't particularly enjoy it because it did make me use the pogo skill. I did get through it. I did acquire the Void Heart, and I could have left it at that. I could very easily have left it at that. But within the White Palace is an area called the Path of Pain, and within the community, the Path of Pain is infamous as being the ultimate platforming challenge of the game. Now, this area is not a mandatory area. It is purely optional. There is no reason whatsoever for a player to force themselves to go through it. Unfortunately, I had been informed that at the end of the Path of Pain, the player would be rewarded with a neat piece of lore, and the lore hunter in me, as you guys might imagine, could not resist that. So I did put myself through that hell, and I spent hours upon hours upon hours suffering there. Trying to pogo, failing to pogo, being sent back to the beginning over and over and over again, progressing through the path one segment at a time at a very slow pace. But I persevered. And eventually I was able to reach the end of it. And my reward for reaching the end of it was a short scene that lasted maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Not much at first glance, but that scene actually revealed something very important regarding the lore, the history, the past of Hallownest and what, like, the events that had led to everything happening currently in the game. And more importantly, it also resulted in a very interesting entry in the Hunter's Journal. So, despite the fact that I suffered, I still felt that going through the Path of Pain was well worth the effort. Because I gained new lore, indeed, and I gained a new Hunter's Journal entry. Speaking of the Hunter's Journal, I really loved that. I really loved that, because every time that ghost, so at some point in my playthrough, I decided to call the player character Ghost, so I'm going to refer to them as Ghost from here on out in the video. So every time that Ghost would encounter an enemy and defeat them, be it a standard enemy or a boss or a dream boss, I would gain a new Hunter's Journal entry. And in this entry, I would learn a little bit more about these enemies, but I would also learn maybe a little bit more about the lore of the game. And I loved the fact that I was able to collect these entries and gain insight into the story of the game this way. Because in the Soulsborne games, as much as I love lore hunting in them, in order to gain any kind of lore, the player has to collect items, equipment pieces, and weapons. And maybe the item descriptions of those items, equipment pieces, and weapons maybe might have a tiny little bit of lore in them. Which is, needless to say, a somewhat tedious process of collecting information about the game's story. So I loved the fact that in Hollow Knight I had this very nice way of collecting information. Moreover, it was just fun to pursue this sort of like mini side quest throughout the entirety of the playthrough, because I actually completed the Hunter's Journal only at the very end of my playthrough, and having this little extra incentive to explore, it was just nice. It was just nice. Speaking of like quests actually in the game, Hollow Knight has some of the best quest lines that I have seen in games, I have to say, and there were two in particular that I really liked. One was Grimm's questline, which is actually the entire Grimm Troop DLC, and the other one was Mr. Mushroom's questline, for entirely different reasons. So when I first started the game, I went into it with little to no information, really. I knew that the game would take place in a world where all of the characters were bugs. And I knew there would be a character called Hornet in the game, even if I didn't know what that character looked like. And I knew, piece of information number 3, that at some point in the game I would encounter a boss called Nightmare King Grim. Now, I was informed that Nightmare King Grim was part of the Grim Troop DLC, so as you might imagine, the moment I found out that I could theoretically already dive into that DLC, I just went for it. I was underleveled and underprepared for it, but I still went for it. I mean, my nail had only been upgraded twice at that point, I think, and I only had, if I remember right, 7 masks and maybe 1 extra soul container of health. Maybe. So I was definitely a little bit underleveled for it, but I still really wanted to meet Nightmare King Grim, so I just went for it. And straight away met Troop Master Grim, who essentially was the ringmaster of a circus. There's a circus? There is a circus now? I summoned the circus, guys. I summoned the circus. Heck. Oh my. Is this the main circus tent? Oh my god. Did I summon a boss fight? The heck is going? Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. What have I done? Who are you? Are you Master? So, it was you who called us. Well met, my friend. Well met. You're Grim? Troop Master. Not Nightmare King? Are there 2 different Grims in the game? Troop Master Grim. Wait, I need to start again. I was too surprised. Which I loved as an aesthetic and as a story choice. I really loved that. But more importantly, Grim himself, he was just a character that I immediately loved. And he gave me Grimchild, the little one, whom I just absolutely adored. I loved going around Hallownest with Grimchild at my side, just exploring, collecting flames, and just having a companion throughout my adventure. I loved that. So that already made the Grim Troop DLC a highlight for me. And then I actually collected enough flames to fight Troop Master Grim. And that became one of my favorite boss fights up to that point in the game. And it honestly, even by the end of my playthrough, it still is one of my favorite boss fights. Because it's such a dance. It's such an enjoyable and fun dance, essentially. And learning the steps to that dance, yeah, it was just a lot of fun for me. But once I defeated Troop Master Grim and collected a few more flames, I was finally able to meet Nightmare King Grim. And that boss fight was a memorable one for me. Not just because it was fast-paced, it was very dynamic, it had so much passion, but also because it's the first boss fight in the game and in general that had forced me to go for nearly 100 attempts in order to defeat that boss. And that was something very new for me, and it very much pushed me in terms of skill. And I still at that point thought that I was a very bad platform gamer. So the challenge was just a really exciting challenge, and the entire Grim Troop DLC quest line became one of the highlights of my playthrough because of that. because of all of it. Well, that, and I have to also mention the music. The music during Troopmaster Grimm and Nightmare King Grimm's boss fights. Amongst my favorite soundtracks in the entire game. So yeah, in all aspects, the Grimm Troop DLC was just absolutely amazing. And it, like, Grimm's questline became one of my favorites that I've gone through ever, like in all of the games I've played so far. The other questline that I mentioned was Mr. Mushroom's questline. I have to say, when I first met Mr. Mushroom, I didn't really know what to think about him, because I was expecting bugs, talking bugs, yes, but not talking plants. Or maybe I should say fungi, talking fungi. But there was Mr. Mushroom with his face and everything, and he spoke. And when he spoke, he did so in riddles. So I was left somewhat confused, but I was still very open to and very curious to pursue this particular questline. And eventually I found the giant inscription with the riddle that informed me where I could find Mr. Mushroom throughout Hallownest and in what order. And so I just went ahead and continued with that questline, and I sought out Mr. Mushroom, and I found him. And whenever I would find him, I would interact with him. And whenever I would interact with him, I would have more questions than answers by the end of the interaction. Actually, I only had questions by the end of each interaction, no answers. And it just got increasingly more confusing with each interaction, until by the end of the questline, when Mr. Mushroom revealed that he was not only a talking mushroom, but also a talking mushroom that could fly, I was just pure confusion. Still, the lore hunter in me would not allow me to just remain confused, and so I sat there and I thought about it, I pondered it. I went through the notes that I'd taken with each interaction, and I tried to fit everything into the context of the game. Some elements were impossible to place, like, for example, there was a mention about the moon, or maybe a being representing the moon. And throughout the entire game, there just isn't any such mention. There is no such being in the entire game, or even a mention of the moon in the entire game. So, like, elements like that made no sense to me. But at some point, I did feel something click, and from that one little, I don't know, corner of the puzzle that I'd managed to put together, I tried to put the rest together as well. And it sort of actually came together in a way that made sense to me, and I was actually even very proud of the theory that I'd come up with. Only to then find out in comments that Mr. Mushroom's entire questline is just a series of Easter eggs referring to other games developed by Team Cherry. So in short, there was just no connection whatsoever with Hollow Knight and the story of the game. No connection whatsoever. It was just a series of Easter eggs. So I pondered on it for nothing, and my theory was just nothing and nonsense. So that plot twist, I have to say, very much made Mr. Mushroom's questline a memorable one, and also a highlight of my playthrough. Because it was just fun to speculate and theorize and exciting. And then there came this unexpected revelation that, oh, it actually has nothing to do with the game. It's an entirely separate thing. So yeah, that was definitely a memorable moment. Definitely a memorable moment. And Mr. Mushroom is going to remain in my memory as one of the most interesting NPCs I've ever come across. Speaking of the NPCs, actually, Hollow Knight has fantastic NPCs. They all have their own personality and character, and it very much shines through in the interactions with those NPCs. Zod's arrogance and like personality are very distinct, and they come through with every single sentence that he speaks. Or Tiso's overconfidence in his own ability as a warrior, and Cornifer's curiosity about the world of Hallownest and his desire to explore and to discover the world, and the Dung Defender's kindness and just lovely, I dare say, pure heart. All of these personalities, all these character traits, they just come through in every single interaction with these characters. And I loved that they were three-dimensional beings, essentially, and not something two-dimensional. I loved that about the NPCs in this game. And of course, I have to also mention Hornet. Of course, because she is a slightly more important NPC, if I may say so, than the others, in the sense that she has a very deep connection to the lore of the game. Now, not that I didn't discover more about the lore about the story, the history of Hallownest by interacting with the other NPCs. I did discover new pieces of information every now and then, but Hornet has a very strong connection to Ghost and to everything that had happened in Hallownest's past and everything that was happening in Hallownest's present. So the interactions with her in particular were something that I always looked forward to. And not just the interactions, but also, and this is another element that I really enjoyed, was the dream nail, or the dream thoughts as I called it, or dream dialogues, which could be accessed by using the dream nail on the characters. It didn't actually harm them, but it sort of pierced through their thoughts and allowed for some insight into them and into what they thought of the situation. And that was incredibly intriguing. Now, there were of course some characters where that wasn't possible, but what I found particularly interesting was that the bosses could have dream dialogue. Now, in order to actually see that dream dialogue, the player would have to be able to hit the bosses with the dream nail. And the wind-up time for the dream nail is something that took time. It's just something that took time, and usually boss fights were fast-paced, and yeah, it definitely required a certain level of skill. So thankfully you guys were kind enough to, or the people who left comments were kind enough to tell me what the dream dialogue for some of the bosses was, since I couldn't find that out. I wasn't that good of a gamer, of a platform gamer, to be able to do that. But the dream dialogues were fascinating, because not only did they offer insight into the characters, but they would also sometimes offer insight into the story of Hallownest, what had happened in the past, particularly things regarding the Moth Clan and the Moth Tribe, I suppose, and the civilization that had existed in Hallownest prior to the one that came about under the Pale King's influence, under the Pale King's reign, I should actually say. So that was just fascinating for me, and the lore hunter part of me in particular enjoyed that. Of course, in order to interact with these characters, I had to first find them, and finding them meant exploring, and exploring meant discovering more of the map. So in a way, in order to acquire more lore, I had to explore the map more, and by exploring the map more, I would always have a reason to continue pursuing more lore. And of course, the more lore I uncovered, and this is something that I also really liked about the game, the more endings I could unlock. Now the endings of Hollow Knight, are definitely one of the highlights of my playthrough. Now the first one, the easiest one to achieve, is essentially, like, to me it seemed to be essentially the same as the linking the fire ending in the Dark Souls games. It was less a solution to the problem at hand and more simply delaying having to deal with the issue. So I didn't really like it all that much, and it's one of the reasons why I decided to pursue the other endings as well. Now, once again, I doubted that I would actually be able to achieve all of the endings, because the more endings I wanted to unlock, the more difficult the game would become. No, not necessarily the more difficult the game would become, but rather the more challenging the quest to unlock those endings would be. So for example, in order to unlock the second and third ending, I had to find or to acquire something called the Void Heart, and I had to get my Dream Nail to a certain level. And in order to get it to a certain level, I had to locate and fight various dream bosses. So there is an extra level of challenge added with each ending that the player wants to unlock. And the second and third endings were very interesting because they were very different despite having similar conditions. The second ending, I have to say, is my least favorite ending, the Sealed Siblings ending, because once again, it's not a solution to the problem of the infection. It is merely delaying having to deal with the problem. But in many ways, it's also actually worse than the first ending because it just didn't leave the option of finding a way of dealing with the problem at some point in the future. So in a way, I would say that the second ending is the least hopeful one. The future of Hallownest is very bleak with that ending. The third ending, on the other hand, is the first one that actually presented a solution to the problem and actually revealed what the source of the problem was. And I really liked that because it was also the first ending where there was actually some hope for the future of Hallownest. There was some hope there of it maybe getting better and then life returning to Hallownest, rather than just crumbling to dust or something like that. And then I decided to pursue the fourth and fifth ending. And in order to do that, I had to go through the ultimate boss rush, the ultimate challenge in this game, the God Home DLC. And those endings were actually even better than the third ending, because they revealed... No, I don't want to... No. I'm not going to say anything more specific because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone who might be watching this video and who hasn't played the game. But the fourth and fifth endings are by far my favorites. And the fifth one especially is very intriguing because it creates some questions about a certain NPC and a certain item in the game. So I'll just leave it at that. But overall, I want to say that forgive me. Sorry. My throat. So what I want to say is that I really loved the fact that with each ending, except for the second one, each ending was an increasingly more hopeful one. There was increasingly more of a chance of an actual solution to the problem of the infection plaguing Hallownest. And I really loved that from a lore perspective. Really enjoyed that from a lore perspective. Because it made pursuing all of these endings all that much more worth it. Like, it was worth going through the effort of meeting the conditions to unlock each of those endings. Except for the second one, which again, my least favorite of them all. But not necessarily what I would call a negative point in the game. Definitely not a negative point. It's like I just didn't like it. I just didn't like it from a story point of view. I didn't. So yeah, the endings were just fantastic they were just fantastic. Even if actually achieving some of them was really difficult. But worth pursuing. Something else that I really liked about the game, and that I have to mention, is the music in the game. The music, both boss soundtracks and area soundtracks. Now, area soundtracks is something that I wasn't actually really all that used to. In the Souls games, usually it's only the main hub of the game that has an area soundtrack, with maybe 1 or 2 more areas that have soundtracks. Like, for example, in Bloodborne Yahar'gul, it, technically speaking, has a soundtrack in the form of the very creepy, ominous chanting. But usually it's just the main hub in those games that had an area soundtrack. Whereas in Hollow Knight, every single area has a soundtrack. And those soundtracks are, like, they tell just as much about the area as the visual element of the areas. And I really, really liked that. Even if... Okay, so maybe... No. So not every single area actually has a soundtrack. Not every single area has a soundtrack. I was wrong. Deep Nest, for example, doesn't have a soundtrack. It only has sounds. It has sounds, but no soundtrack, which actually made the area feel even creepier than it probably would have just based on the visual aspect of it alone. Because by that point, the player is so used to hearing area soundtracks as they progress through the various places in Hallownest, that suddenly not having them feels very ominous. Which probably is one of the main reasons why going through Deep Nest was an unpleasant experience. And it made me feel very, very afraid. Which wasn't helped by the fact that it's also the area where all of the spiders are. And I do have some level of arachnophobia. It's less bad than it was when I first started the channel, because apparently every single FromSoft game has to have a spider enemy of some sort, and in particular a spider boss. So thank you, FromSoft, for forcing me to confront my fear of spiders, I guess. But I once again had to confront that fear in this game. Which, okay, makes sense. It's a game where there are bugs and insects. It makes sense for arachnids to also be included. I wish they hadn't been, but they were. And I had to deal with them. What had I started talking about before I went into this tangent about Deep Nest? Oh right, area music. So I loved having the area music, and some areas of course stood out more than others. City of Tears, for example, I really liked because it was nice and gentle and soft, but at the same time it was also kind of sad. And it fits not just the name City of Tears, but also the atmosphere within the city. Or, for example, Green Path. Green Path had a very, I don't know really how to describe it except nature-oriented kind of music, like area music, which made it feel as if I was kind of walking through a forest or through a very pleasant meadow or something like that. And I really enjoyed that. Or the music of the Soul Sanctum. The music of the Soul Sanctum. So, I don't know, music that includes chanting always has this sort of gravitas, this sort of pathos that I really like. But at the same time, the chanting in the Soul Sanctum definitely lent it a very kind of like a not just ominous edge, but it kind of hinted at something profoundly disturbing happening there. And I just love it when the music adds to the character of an area, or as the case may be, of a boss. So for example, the Soul Master's boss music was very fitting indeed, considering what the Soul Master had done. So the ominous vibe of the Soul Sanctum continuing with the Soul Masters, and that sense of I want it to be greater and I'm going to aim at that greatness no matter what kind of sacrifices I have to make along the way. That was fantastic. Or for example, the very dynamic music of the Mantis Lord's boss fight. It fit them so well because that boss fight is so fast-paced, and it really feels as if the player is I don't know, has to be on the ball the entire time, on, because it's just that fast, and the music really fitted very well. There was also a somewhat regal element to it, which I liked because they were the Mantis Lords. They were the greatest warriors of their tribe, and as such they were the leaders of the Mantis tribe. So it was just very, very appropriate. Very, very appropriate. Or for example, the Dung Defender's boss music. It's just as jovial and light-hearted and uplifting as the Dung Defender himself. So it was just wonderful to have this amazing music throughout the entirety of the playthrough, regardless of if I was going through an area or going into a boss fight. That very much added to both the immersion into the game and also to the sense of completeness, if I may say so, of the game. Just everything fit together so well in it. Everything fit together so well in it. The areas, the visual element, the audio element, the sound, the music, well, the sounds and the music in the areas, the enemies, the NPCs that I would encounter in each of those areas, the interactions with those NPCs, the way that the lore would gradually come together the more that the player explored and discovered and pursued, and the locations of the abilities that could be gained, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video. It all just comes together so beautifully to create a world that the player wants to immerse themselves into as much as possible. And I just loved that. I just loved the entire game. It's difficult for me to find something that I disliked about it. Difficult for me to find even one negative thing to say, actually. Let me think, is there something negative? Talking about immersion, there is something that I disliked about the game, and that is Salubra's Blessing. Now, I know that there are players who say it's a great thing, and genuinely, the benefit from Salubra's Blessing is very much a good thing. Sit at a bench, and you don't even have to have sought out a soul totem or a healing pool in order to refill all of the soul containers. It's a great blessing. But unfortunately, it's a blessing accompanied by Salubra's spirit giggling the entire time whilst she is showering Ghost with soul in order to refill their soul containers. And that giggling, I found so irritating. Purely because the moment I would hear it when I rested at a bench, it would just immediately take me out of the immersion. Just immediately. And I really, really wasn't happy about it. I wasn't, because I had kind of gotten used to being able to sit at a bench and just sit and consider what my next move would be, or maybe to contemplate what I had just discovered or found out in terms of lore, or maybe enemies, or about the area. I don't know, but I had just gotten used to being able to sit on a bench and think. And I could just enjoy the music of the area whilst doing that. Not so after acquiring Salubra's Blessing, because whenever I would sit at a bench, she would appear and start giggling, and it would not end. It would not end until I hopped down from the bench. Now, granted, the new patch does mean that Salubra disappears the moment that the soul containers are full, but until they are full, she is still there, and she is still giggling, and that giggling still just destroys the immersion. So that is actually one thing that I dislike about the game. The one thing I dislike about the game, Salubra's Blessing. Everything else is just great. Everything else is just great. Oh, there is something that I nearly forgot to mention actually, and that is an area in the game called the Shrine of Believers. The Shrine of Believers doesn't have anything to do actually with the game. It's something that the developers decided to add in order to simply show their appreciation for the support that they received throughout the development of the game. And in the Shrine of Believers, these supporters, these backers, could leave messages. And some of those messages were pretty damn amazing and awesome, to be honest, and cool. And yeah, I just think it's incredibly sweet and nice and lovely that the developers decided to do this to show their appreciation, which just, you know, elevates them in my eyes as a great game studio, really. Not just because their work is fantastic, but also because they're just genuinely good people. From what I've found out about them and heard and seen and experienced through the game, they're just lovely people. And I love that they added this area, the Shrine of Believers, to show their appreciation for the support they received. Like, how many other games have done that? How many other games have done that? I don't know of any. Admittedly, I haven't played that many, and I am not necessarily the most knowledgeable person when it comes to games that exist out there, but I haven't heard of any other games doing something like this. So I think that's just fantastic. And yeah, I think those are the main highlights and thoughts I have about the game. I don't know. What was your experience like with the game, guys? What did you like about it or dislike about it? Was there a certain boss or area that you particularly loved, or a certain item or element of the game that you really enjoyed? What did you find most difficult or easiest? Did you struggle as much as I did with the platforming aspect of it? I don't know. Leave your answers to these questions in the comments below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, check out the link below. And if you're curious about, if you're watching this video and have not watched my playthrough, feel free to give it a look on my channel. And I still don't know how to end these videos. I still don't know how to end these videos. I guess this is the moment when I say thank you also to everyone who left comments throughout my playthrough, and just a lot of encouragement and support, because I don't think I would have been able to actually get as far as I did if you guys hadn't done that. So thank you for that. And I don't know, just share your experience with the game in the comments below. Leave a like, subscribe, and hopefully see you guys in my next playthrough.